So, hey Thais, come here for a sec. What's going on? What is this? Oh yeah, it's that accessory thing.
Yeah,
Thanks.
exactly.
All right, so now that I've had a dramatic entrance, we can get started. So my name is Shiri Azenkot. I'm a professor here. I'm going to talk to you today about XR access, making augmented and virtual reality accessible. So technology is constantly evolving, and we're here at Cornell Tech, so we all have an appreciation for that. And one of the shifts that we're seeing happening right now is that augmented and virtual reality technologies, so technologies where virtual or digital items are embedded in the space around us, are becoming much more mainstream. So these technologies started out as something that gamers use, right? So see people playing games with these large clunky headsets, but now we're starting to see the devices becoming a little more usable. We're seeing glasses that have displays on them that people can use while they're biking or walking around. And we see the sort of virtual reality technology that's even being used for socializing, for remote work, onboarding people into new jobs. So a variety of different things that go well beyond niche areas like gaming. And this is a trend that we see with every new computing platform. So it starts out slow and then it starts to gain traction. Before you know it, it's become mainstream. And we're at this point now with virtual and augmented reality technologies. So before you know it, these technologies are going to become an everyday part of our lives. And I've been interested in virtual and augmented reality for quite a while, ever since I was in grad school. Do you guys remember when Google Glass came out? Anybody remember what year that was? Some trivia. 2015? It was actually earlier than that. Good guess. 2012, yeah. Good. So in 2012, Google came out with Google Glass, and it was ahead of its time in some ways. There was a lot of buzz around it. And, you know, for those of us who remember, there was also quite a bit of consternation. But it was a symbol of what's to come. And I saw Google Glass as an eager grad student, as an opportunity to solve some problems. Not just Google Glass, but all the technologies that were similar to it and waiting down the pipeline. So I started my career here at Cornell Tech wanting to figure out how we can leverage technologies like Google Glass, so smart glasses or augmented reality technologies more generally, how we can leverage them to solve problems for people with disabilities. And specifically, I was looking at people with low vision. So low vision is when you have a visual impairment, but you still have some amount of usable vision. And this is actually a lot more common than blindness, than complete vision loss. So I started out my research group, recruited some wonderful PhD students, and we did some studies to understand what daily challenges people with low vision faced and looking for opportunities for designing augmented reality technologies that can support people with low vision. And one of the challenges that we identified was finding a particular product on a grocery store shelf. So visualize the scenario. You're at the store, you're standing in an aisle, and you're looking for a specific type of, let's say, Tylenol extra strength. Oops, now Tylenol is politically incorrect, so maybe I should have changed this example. So for most people, this is, you know, a daily task. It's not particularly difficult, but for someone with low vision, this can be extremely difficult. It's called a visual search task. It's looking around, looking for a particular target among a set of distractors. This is a fundamental visual task, and we actually do it all the time. And the way our brain and visual system is wired is that when you're doing a visual search task, this happens at a subconscious level, the target is going to pop out and draw your attention to it. For people with low vision, this doesn't really happen. So they have to pick up one product at a time, look at it very carefully, examine it, see whether it's the product that they're looking for. And like I was saying, this is just one instance of a very general problem. So, for example, even when you're walking around, just walking around, anytime your brain is constantly doing visual search because you're looking for obstacles in your way. So, if there is an obstacle in your way, it pops out at you so you can move around it. And again, this all happens at a subconscious level. So, it's not something that we're conscious of, but it is something that is happening in our visual and neurological system. So back to low vision. So we identified this problem. It's a specific instance of this broader challenging task, visual search. And we realized that we can leverage AI and augmented reality to solve this problem. Currently, there was no solution. So we designed an augmented reality system that uses computer vision to identify a specified product, a target, and then overlay visual cues to make the product more noticeable, more visible to a person who has some amount of vision loss. So you can see here on the slide the different visual cues that we designed, and they were specifically designed for people with different types of low vision conditions. So for example, one visual cue was putting a frame around the product that flashed light gray on and off, on and off. And in addition to this, we developed other augmented reality solutions to problems that currently have no other solutions. So this particular design, we called it QC, cues to help with a visual search task. We always conduct study with our target users, and we found that it was extremely effective in helping people find a target among a set of distractors, a product on a shelf. And we did similar, developed similar designs and conducted evaluations for augmented reality systems to help people walk up and down stairs and to help them also wayfind, so navigate, find their way to a certain destination. But all throughout this time, I was working with my students, and I myself couldn't actually build any of the prototypes. And all of my degrees are in computer science. So, you know, I spent my formative academic years building things. I've developed prototypes every time that I wanted to explore an idea. But I wasn't able to with these new technologies. So I had to have my students build the prototypes, and they would design some kind of accessible application, like the QC application, for example. And they would then hand me a prototype that was designed for a person with low vision, and only then I'd be able to experience it and give them some feedback. But the platforms themselves, any and all of the augmented reality or virtual reality platforms and glasses that we experimented with, that we used in our lab, were completely inaccessible. I couldn't even get to the point where I turned one on and got to the home screen, right? So there was clearly a huge problem here. Then fast forward to 2019, something very, very unusual happened. We had some extra money that we didn't know what to do with. So with some collaborators here at Cornell Tech, I proposed to put on a workshop that looked at how to make virtual and augmented reality technologies accessible. We joined forces with Yahoo, with Larry Goldberg, who was the head of accessibility at Yahoo. And we set this workshop up in the summer of 2019. We held it here. No, actually, this place wasn't even built. It was in Tata, in the neighboring building. And the goal of this workshop was to bring together all the different stakeholders in this area. So academics, people who are doing the research, practitioners, and advocates, the people with disabilities themselves, to understand what exactly are the challenges when it comes to augmented and virtual reality technologies, and how can we address them? How can we make them accessible? And the key idea here was not to see how we can use them as assistive technologies, which is also a wonderful and worthy cause, but to make sure that the mainstream technologies themselves were accessible and usable by people with disabilities. And nobody had been talking about this. So this is the 2019 symposium. And one thing that I want to emphasize is that I'm not the only one who can't currently use virtual and augmented reality technologies. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 adults has some kind of disability. So whether it's a visual disability or some other kind of sensory disability, a hearing disability, some kind of mobility disability, people move their bodies in different ways, or have sensory sensitivities. There's a whole variety of differences in human ability that make it extremely difficult for people to use these mainstream technologies. So after the XR Access Symposium, we set up the XR Access Initiative. And the goal of the initiative was to follow through on what we had set out to do in the symposium, which is to actually do the research, the education, and the advocacy that was needed to make augmented and virtual reality technologies accessible. So I'd like to give you an example of one of the research projects that came out of this push, the XR Access push. And this project has to do with making social virtual reality accessible using a sighted guide. And this project was done in collaboration with my students, Jasmine Collins, Crescentia Jung, and Andrea Stevenson-Wan, who is a professor at Cornell up in Ithaca in communications. The goal of this project was to make virtual reality, social virtual reality, accessible for people with visual impairments. And we actually weren't the first to try and make virtual reality accessible to people with vision disabilities. There had been prior efforts for quite a few years, actually. And these prior efforts took the same general approach. So when you're standing in a virtual environment, researchers proposed to make all the important visual elements in that environment also emit sounds. So for example, you're in this environment where there's a water fountain up ahead of you. So in addition to the water fountain being there visually, it also has the sound of a trickling water. And then in addition to that, if you walk closer to the water fountain, you hear the sound of footsteps. So all of the important visual elements are sonified. So let me see if I can get this video to work. Do you guys hear that? Let's try it again. I don't think it's playing in the room. Trickling water, footsteps. It's faint. So this is all fine and good for this sort of scene that you see here. But what happens in a scene that's more like this? So in social virtual reality, you can have multiple people joining the same virtual environment to communicate, to socialize, to attend a virtual conference together. And these environments are much more chaotic, much more unpredictable. How do you handle accessibility in this sort of environment where there's too much going on to understand what everything is when it's emitting sounds? And an additional problem is that in a social virtual environment, you need to communicate with other people. So you need to be able to hear and focus on those communications. So how do you make this environment accessible? Well, for inspiration, we turned to what happens in the real world, which is also complex and unpredictable. So, a common way that people with visual impairments get support in the real world is through a very simple technique called sighted guide. And this is just the idea that you walk alongside a sighted person. You gently touch the back of their elbow, and then you can feel which way they're turning, if they're turning around obstacles through doorways, and so on and so forth. And of course, since you're with another person, you have the benefit of simply talking to them. How can we apply this very simple but very useful technique to virtual reality? This was our question. So we developed two specific research questions. And the first one was, what are people with visual impairments, visual disabilities, what are their needs in the context of a sighted guide in social virtual reality? And then the second one was, how can we design a sighted guide to support these needs? So what design approaches can support these needs? And we set out to answer this question by developing a social VR prototype. So we designed these custom environments that emulated municipal parks, they had trees, gazebos, streams, and so on and so forth. Multiple people could enter these environments. They could walk around. They could grab some items in them. They could teleport, all the basic functionality of a social virtual reality setting. We simulated it in our own custom environments. And then we designed a way to include sighted guides in this environment. So the way this worked is that multiple people could join the scene, and if you were a person with a vision disability who needed a sighted guide, then you could grab on to another person, the guide, in the environment by stepping virtually really close to them and then pressing on the trigger in your controller. And then you would grab onto them. Anywhere the sighted guide would then go, the person who's grabbing with a visual disability would go along with them. So in that way, you can get navigation support. So basically, the person with a visual impairment would follow along automatically with the sighted guide if they were holding on, in quotes, to them using this new grabbing mechanism. And we call this shared movement. So you're sharing the movement with a guide. So we conducted studies with 16 participants who had some amount of visual impairment, so blind and low vision participants, to study how they used a sighted guide. We had one of the researchers on our team serve as the guide, and this was really an exploratory study to see what would happen. What were people's needs and perceptions, reactions to this sighted guide experience in virtual reality? How did it affect and impact their experience in the VR space? So let me show you a short example of an interaction between one of the participants and our guide.
All right, can we just continue on a path? Like, is there a path that goes all the way around it?
Yeah, it looks like there's a path right behind us that goes to another area of the park.
Okay, let's turn around and do that. I'm gonna grab on again.
Okay, so you heard the participant asking the guide a question, and then she said, well, I'm gonna grab on again so the guide can take her to where she wants to go. So we analyzed all of the qualitative data that we collected from observing these participants in action with the guide. We also interviewed every participant to hear about their experience in their own words. And here's what we found. We looked at all of the different types of interactions that participants had with the guide, and we found that by far the most common was participants asking the guide questions. They asked questions about the visual space. They wanted to know about the environment, what's in front of them, what's to the right, what's far off in the distance, what does the gazebo look like, is there a path that gets us there? And they wanted to also know about people. So we had a few people, a few robot avatars in the environment, and participants were very curious to know about them. Were they in a relationship? What were they laughing about? Secondly, participants also wanted the guide to confirm a lot of information that they already surmised themselves about the environment. So a lot of it was participants just needing that extra confidence boost. For example, they would ask, is this the river in front of us? What's on the right? Is this the path that gets us to the gazebo? And the guide was there to give them assurance that they were correct. And the third thing, so this is in order of frequency, that participants did with the guide was ask the guide to do things for them. And this included the navigation requests. So by far the most important role of the guide, or at least the most frequent interaction, was that participants wanted to talk to the guide and get the guide's interpretations of the visuals in the scene. And the guide was very, very helpful for that. Participants really liked being able to do that. It was interesting to see that participants generally fell into two categories in how they seemed to conceptualize the guide. So about half of the participants seemed to think of the guide as a tool. So they called the guide guide. They spoke to it very formally. They only said what was needed to be said. Their requests were very kind of plain, almost brusque. And another set of participants really treated the guide as a companion. So they were much friendlier. They were more polite. They wanted to know the guide's name. And we even had one participant who wanted the guide to dance with him.
Oh, I want to dance. 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8.
So you can see the camera, this is from the guide's perspective, is bobbing along because the guide has obliged. We also talked to the participants a lot about the guide's appearance. So on the slide here, you can see what the guide looked like. We modeled the guide's avatar to look more or less like one of the participants on the team. So this was a young woman, short, dark hair, casual clothing. And participants liked this appearance and said that, they wanted the guide to be dressed appropriately for the scenario. If this was a more professional virtual setting, they wanted the guide to dress appropriately as well. And we also asked them about alternative forms to the guide. Does the guide even have to be a human? Interestingly, 4 of the participants out of 16 spontaneously, so without our prompting, told us that they would like to have a guide who is like a bird that's perched on their shoulder. So this is getting at one of the very cool things about accessibility in VR, which is we're not limited to the constraints of the physical world. So the guide doesn't have to be another human standing next to you. It could be anything. It could be a bird perched on the shoulder. It could even be invisible. And it'll be interesting in the future to experiment with these different guide forms and to see how they influence the interaction, both between the user and the guide and other people's perception of the guide and the user. So that leads me to other next steps for this project. And the primary question that I'm sure is in everybody's mind is, well, this looks promising, but can we do it with AI? So in our study, we had a human acting as the guide. Can we learn from that and train an AI guide? And the answer is, you will see, because one of my students will talk about this tomorrow, I believe. But yes, we are developing an AI guide. This is work that's in progress. It's going to be very interesting to see how people react to the AI guide and how it compares to interaction with a human, and what are the possibilities of having a guide that is not constrained by physics. So this is an example of just one project that looks at how to make virtual reality more accessible to people with visual disabilities. But there are many other types of disabilities, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, that should be addressed and explored. Augmented and virtual reality is a relatively new platform. It's just gaining traction, becoming slowly but surely more mainstream. And we need to ask questions about how different people are using this platform, whether they have hearing disabilities, cognitive disabilities, mobility disabilities, whether they move their body in an atypical way. What challenges they experience and how we can address those challenges. It's really important to do this now because we have to be proactive when it comes to accessibility. In the past, we've seen it happen over and over and over again that we don't pay attention to accessibility. Technology, we have various excuses. The technology is not mainstream. The technology is niche. First, we'll fix the underlying technology challenges. First, we'll make it more affordable. And all of a sudden, we're in a situation where we have a mainstream technology and it's completely inaccessible. So it's extremely important to prioritize accessibility now before we're all using augmented and virtual reality on a daily basis. So with that, I'd like to conclude the talk and thank all of my collaborators on this work, my students. I have a wonderful research group, Ricky Gonzalez, Crescentia Jung, Jasmine Collins, Sharon Hyung, and my collaborator in this and partner in crime, Andrea Stevenson-Wan. And without them, this work wouldn't have been possible. So thank you very much and happy to take questions. That was up.
I have a kickoff question. And
Okay, just a heads up, sorry to interrupt. I can't always tell where the question is coming from because of the audio system. So I may not be looking in the correct direction. So just a heads up. Yes, please.
So it's Diane and I'm directly in front of you right now. My question, because I have the mic, is I'm profoundly deaf in my right ear and fully hearing in my left ear. And it makes me think about the fact that disability is very much not a one size fits all, right? And people with low vision, for instance, it's a wide variety, right? From low vision to blind, it's a world of difference. When you're designing this work, how do you accommodate or account for all of this variability in people's abilities and needs?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very difficult. That's the truth. So we pick an audience to focus on, and in terms of visual disabilities, for example, we'll often look for patterns that are distinct to blindness versus low vision. So it's important to recognize that, there are some groups that do have commonalities to them. And within those groups, it's important to look at within which dimensions it's important to customize. So, we need to narrow the focus somehow. Like, yes, customization is important, but we need to figure out what are the key dimensions or areas or features that should be customizable. And that's one of the things that we try to output from the research. So what are the design considerations? What things should we be thinking about or allowing for in future designs?
Thanks.
Are there other questions? Do raise your hand. I do have one question while the others are thinking of their questions. Like, you talked a lot about the software that we're designing for mixed reality. If you could dream, like, what would be the ideal version of hardware that would actually well support like different types of accessibility?
So you're asking what hardware would be ideal for different...
What would be your dream hardware? Like I'm sure what we are having right now is not ideal yet. What can we do?
Yeah. Well, I can't speak to anything that would support everyone, right? apropos the previous question about customizability. But in my mind, where we're headed and what would be ideal is just to have some sensors on, these frames that I'm wearing now, and to have a screen that could display augmented reality visuals or even virtual reality. So a screen that could go from being partly transparent to opaque.
I'm voting for the bird on the robot bird on the shoulder with the sensors. I'm just saying. Also, while we have quiet in the room, I want to actually thank you. I lost my hearing on my right ear while I was here at Cornell. And shortly afterwards, you gave a talk, had nothing to do with me, on visual impairment and sort of society. And you flashed on the fact that glasses are so chic, but hearing aids are so unchic, right? And you talked about ageism, and it was the first time that somebody made that visible for me in a way that really spoke to me and the struggle I was in the moment, with trying to internalize the disability. Anyway, I'm very grateful because it was actually super helpful. And now, in a twist of technology, AirPods, which are chic enough, are now hearing aids, and I can actually transfer the sound from my right ear to and hear it in my left ear when I wear those AirPods. And it made me think of you when they came out. So thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions in the room? One over there.
It's not a question. It's also just a note of gratitude. When I was looking at programs, I completed the MBA program here a few years ago. And seeing the work that you were doing here was one of the things that attracted me to Cornell Tech. And I teach a XR storytelling class for high school students since 2016. And I just want to know, I made a poster of you on the room in the classroom and talk about, back then, there was so much excitement about it, and the work you're doing and the safety and access issues that you have been such a champion of. Really appreciate. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions right now, I propose that we transition into a short coffee break. We're probably going to shorten this a little bit depending on the bus arrival from Ithaca. As soon as they are here, we will continue with the next session so that we are roughly on time still overall. Thank you so much. Let's have a coffee break. One more round of applause for Shiri.